All right.
Yep.
Good morning. My name is Dr. Shamira A. Brown, and I have my PhD, my doctoral degree in environmental chemistry, so that's why the doctor is along with my name. I work for the Federal Aviation Administration, or FAA, which you usually hear on the news, FAA, which is short, because we always use acronyms all the time. And I work in the Office of Airport Planning and Programming. And the division that I'm specifically in is called the National Planning and Environmental Division. And my position is called an environmental specialist. What I do when I'm on my job is I review what is called an environmental impact statement, which has to do with reporting environmental impacts for either a new airport or to extend a runway at an airport. So everyone knows how an airport looks, correct? And how a runway extension looks. So all of you have flown the airport, flown the plane, right?
Oh, yeah.
Great. So you know what I'm talking about. Great. So what we usually do is the team of us that review EIS, or what is called an environmental assessment, which is a shorter report of an airport project for a runway. And it comprised of myself, which is a headquarters environmental specialist, a regional environmental specialist, which is either located at Dulles Airport, you know where Dulles Airport is. So we have the regional environmental specialist at Dulles Airport. We have an environmental attorney that works with us to make sure that all the federal environmental regulations are complied with as we review the documents. And we work with the airport sponsor, which is the person who maintains operations at an airport like Dulles Airport. We have, for instance, someone who makes sure that everything in the airport is run properly and that everyone is being accommodated as they come to the airport for their different flights. And we also work with different consultants, and they are the ones that actually write the reports. So as you can see, it's a team of us that work together, and it's also a process as well too. So we have what is called a scoping meeting, which is a planning meeting where we directly meet with each other so we can discuss different environmental issues that may take place as we do a project. And we usually also have public meetings right after a draft of the environmental impact statement is made, and the draft is also published on the internet, and also when there's a public meeting, it's going to be placed in a newspaper, or you can look it up on the internet so everyone in the public can be aware of what's going on, and anyone can come to the meeting that we usually have. And sometimes it can, like for me, I may have to travel like out of town somewhere, or it may be within the area of Virginia or somewhere in local cities in the state of Virginia, but I do travel sometimes, depends if I have to. We also work with the federally recognized tribes, and because we never work with either the local tribes or the state tribes, it's always the federally recognized tribes, because they're also a federal agency like ourselves. Because when we do our projects, we have the federally recognized tribes all across the nation, and sometimes we have to meet with them so they can know what's going on, and so that we won't interfere with their traditional holidays that they usually have, or interfere with their land, because of course they're in the process of preserving their lands, or historic preservation. And sometimes we have to make sure that we always communicate with them most of the time, because of our federal laws that we have to follow. It has to do with historic preservation, and tribal laws that we have to follow. And we also have initiatives that we follow, or that we always combine with our projects, and that is airport recycling. And we also monitor and track endangered and threatened species that are found on different airports. And so all of the airports must have a recycling program. So if you ever been through any of the airports, have you ever seen the airports with a recycling program before? Yeah, great. Because that's also included in our environmental impact statement. And when we do have our public meetings or public hearings, it's usually the public who comes and they tell everyone, or especially the main people who work on the team like myself, and the airport sponsor and the environmental attorney, consultant, and if they support the project or if they don't support it. And sometimes they support it, sometimes they don't. Have you ever been in a public meeting for an airport before? Anyone? Okay. Well, it's no different than when you go to a public meeting or a hearing for like if a shopping center is gonna be built, or like another, like say a community center. Like say the city would like to build a community center, like a planning, the city wants to build a community center. So it's like basically the same process. They also do an environmental impact statement, but yet we usually just deal with only airports that are in the United States only. And what else I wanted to mention? And we also, when we do build airports, and let's just say there's some wetlands in, like near the airport, let's say there's a pond there, for instance, and they may want to close the pond to construct it into a runway. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. But we have to go through a process where we have to get a water permit in order to close it, to get it done, or sometimes they may not construct the runway at all. But the overall thing is that we must work as a team, we must respect each other. Sometimes we don't always get along, but it's never anything like, it doesn't get like, all we have is like maybe disagreements, but it's not to the point where we get physical. Because usually, sometimes physical situations usually happen at a public meeting, like at a major airport like Chicago. Like I told the other group, I wasn't at the meeting, but before I came on board, one of the environmental specialists who I work with in the same division, when they went to a meeting, someone had threw a chair at someone. And so it can get really bad. Yes, it can. But the only public meeting I ever went to was one for Dulles, when Dulles was getting an extension, runway extension. So how many are familiar with Dulles getting their runway extension? If you know about that, oh great. Okay. Yeah, so they already went through construction and everything. So I was just giving you like a summary of the process of how they go about extending the runway and how we work as a team to make sure that all the federal environmental regulations are followed. That's all. Any questions? Okay. Well, the next gentleman who's going to present, Dr. Lewis.
Good morning. How are you all doing? Let's go around the room and get some names this morning. What is your name, young lady?
Lula.
Lula. Very lovely name. And you?
Cordelia.
Cordelia. That's a very lovely name.
Star.
Star.
Cesar.
Cesar?
Isaias.
Who?
Isaias.
Isaias. Okay, pleasure to meet you all. How many of y'all in here like science? Tell me what you like about it.
I love technology and programming different programs on a computer to make something work. I like programming on computers to make different things work.
And you would, ow! Get my foot.
I'm sorry.
Then you would love comparative toxicology. You would love that a lot. What about you?
I like doing effects on animals, like animal.
Oh, research work?
Yeah, research. Yeah.
You love that too. See, what they're trying to do now is limit the use of animals because of groups like PETA. And I'm nothing against PETA at all. I'm for them in certain ways. But there's also more extreme groups than PETA that want animals to be used. What they're trying to do is get things so you can do things comparatively on the computer and do them with imagery that you can also look at that and say, well, if it gets exposed this amount, it'll get exposed that amount as well. And you?
Anything. Experiments. Anything.
Man after my own heart. And you?
Technology.
Okay. And you? Everything? That about sums it up. What we do in my office, I work in the Environmental Fate and Effects Division. We do risk assessments. Right now I'm working on an endangered species database, and we do re-registration and registration review. And what we're finding with the re-registration and registration review is that a lot of the chemicals were registered improperly and erroneously with errors in the calculation of RQs and the calculation of different kinds of exposure routes. Is anyone here familiar with inhalation and vapor pressure? There are some pesticides that have a very, very high vapor pressure rate, meaning that they give off like a little scent that can be toxic to the other organisms. And in addition to being able to get the oils that we're trying to get, we can be toxic to other non-selective organisms. We've come up with a tool called Tool for Inhalation Risk, which is something similar to what Shamara did not mention up in her presentation, screening tool for noise risk. She came up with that one as well. She's working on that one. She can screen different areas for noise pollution and different things dealing with noise pollution that will affect reproductive rates of endangered species. The screening tool for inhalation risk is another route of exposure that we're looking at, because it can also cause endangered and listed species that we're looking at to be affected by non-selective pesticides that mean they're not supposed to go after those, but they'll get them anyway. So we do write up an assessment and we get our facts together. The laboratory work is done by Bede, and that's in another lab in Fort Meade, Maryland. Or in some cases, the registrant will send you all the work already done, and you just have to review it and make sure it meets EPA guidelines. If it does meet the guidelines, we go ahead and use it to formulate our risk assessment with our problem formulation. If it does not meet the guidelines, but is supplemental, you can still use it in the risk assessment itself. Very few cases arise where we use invalid data. We once had a project where we're working on 2,4-DP exposed to the bluegill sunfish. Does anyone here know what a bluegill sunfish is? If you don't, raise your hand, I'll explain it to you. It's a warm water, freshwater fish, and it's found in various areas in the United States, mainly here. That particular fish is somewhat salt tolerant. It can't take too much of salt, but it can take about 48 hours, after which it'll probably die if it's left in a salt water or estuarine environment. Well, what happened in that experiment, the person doing the lab work, now you know you all have done experiments, correct? You know you're not supposed to add on controls in the experiment. You know you're not supposed to start and stop the experiment and then start it back up, or it's lunchtime, I wanna go watch television, let me stop the experiment. You know, if your controls get contaminated, you can't use them. You also know if test material get on the species, you can't use that results from that either, and you can't use it when it's below a certain temperature. All those were facts that we found in that particular data evaluation record, so that particular experiment was not used, it was invalidated. When you find those that are not going up to the guidelines, you don't use it, you invalidate it, throw it out of there. So far, do we have any questions? Okay.
No question?
And that's about it. That's all we do. We take the information, write up a risk assessment, calculate the RQs from the environmental estimated concentrations, EECs, which we calculate by hand or by computer work, and we run our assessment. If you can write real good, got a good science background, you'll make it. You'll make it. You'll occasionally have some people telling you that you don't know how to write, and then when you get to know them better, you'll figure out they didn't know what they were talking about. Because, you know, you have people that criticize your work no matter what. That's why you can't take criticism too harshly. You gotta learn to let it roll off. If it's not gonna add to your career and it's not gonna help you grow as a person, then it's not important. Any questions? Who wants to be a toxicologist when they grow up here? Okay, that was my field, and I'm still in that field. You have a background in biology and chemistry, and a lot of math too, that's the good thing about it. And if you got a good, strong chemistry feeling, a good, strong biological feeling, you'll make it. You'll make it, and it's fun. So, and EPA is not the only place that hire toxicologists. FDA hired them too, so does NIH. USDA hires a lot of them as well. So if it's overcrowded at EPA, which I don't think will ever be, you always have other options to go to. And the private sector is looking for them too. Any other questions? So it was a pleasure talking to you all today, and hopefully we'll see you all again for the reading.
Alright, is that it? No more questions? Alright, we got 4 more minutes, so if they have a question.